So welcome and thank you all so much for joining us today for this kickoff. We are really excited about this project. It's got multiple components. So we're going to throw a lot of information at you today, but there will be time for questions throughout the presentation, and we'll make the slides available, and we'll be back in touch frequently to answer other questions and to get some more information from you. So we've got a packed agenda, but again, there will be sections for questions throughout. I first wanted to introduce the project team so that you know who will be working with you on this project. You may or may not know me. I'm Carrie Snyder. I'm the Advocacy Director for the Neponset River Watershed Association, and I will be managing the project on the NepRWA side. Let's see, why don't we go to Jerice?
Sure, thanks, Carrie. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, for being with us here today. We're super excited about this project. My name is Jerice Schwartz, and I'll be the project manager on this project from Weston and Sampson. And so I'll kick it over to Indrani Ghosh, who's going to be our technical lead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this meeting. We're really excited to share our kickoff. I'm Indrani Ghosh with Weston and Sampson, a residency technical leader, and will be the technical lead for this project. And with that, I will pass it on to my colleague, Jenny Moonen.
Hey everyone, I'm Jenny Moonen. I am supporting Indrani and Jerice with all sorts of technical and modeling and project items, and you'll be hearing from me with some data requests very shortly after this meeting.
And how about Ian?
Hi everybody, I'm Ian Cook, Executive Director at the Watershed Association, and I'll be helpful along the way.
And Van.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Van Du. I'm Senior Environmental Planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and I'll be working on some part of this project as well, supporting you. Thanks.
Thank you. And then all of you are going to be fantastic project partners. And so I was wondering if all of the participants could introduce themselves in the chat. We'll save that and we'll help you out with your timekeeping for the project. For everybody who's attending this meeting. I did want to say a special thank you to Dedham for stepping up to be the fiscal agent on this project. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this regional effort. So thank you very much, Jason.
We got nothing else better to do over here, so why not?
All right, but you can see we really do have partners all across the watershed. I really think this is going to be a fantastic project as a result of all of you participating. So thank you so much. So project overview. So we're going to get into more detail about each of these core elements as we go through the presentation. But this is just to give you a sense of the overview. We've got 5 core elements that we're going to be working on this year. So first is the regional Neponset River Watershed flood model. We are also going to fine tune the model for a neighborhood in Dedham to sort of look at some implementation strategies, some flooding solutions, and that will be able to be extrapolated to other communities. We're also going to be working on developing a framework for regional collaboration on climate adaptation for all of our communities. I think we've done a great job doing that through the NSP on stormwater. And I think we can come up with some regional solutions to the non-water and water impacts of climate change. So we want to take a broader view and see what we can do effectively on a regional basis versus leaving it to all of you to do on your own. We're also going to be developing a workshop to provide technical assistance on some land use, some climate resilient land use resources that can be used. So we'll introduce some of those resources and then provide technical assistance around those. And then, as with all MVP projects, we've got a great community engagement plan to make sure that the community is involved, has input, and buys into the end result of this project, because we'll need their support moving forward. So the goals of the project, clearly we wanted to develop a climate planning tool for all of you. And this will bring us in line with both the Mystic River Watershed and the Charles River Watershed. This tool is also intended to integrate the new and existing town scale flood modeling efforts by Canton, Boston, and Stoughton. We also want to better understand the regional impacts of climate change and how it's affecting the watershed. We really want to meaningfully engage residents around climate impacts and potential solutions over the long term. This isn't something we're going to solve immediately. We want to provide Dedham with some potential solutions for a targeted area, and that can then be used as a model for other communities. And then finally, we really want to develop a foundation for deepening our regional partnership to equitably and effectively address climate change. So here we are. So this map just highlights the 500-year floodplain, and you can see it's scattered throughout the watershed. Really affects every community, and this is really going to become the 100-year floodplain. So it would be great to see how all of this is working on a watershed-wide basis. And this is some data that MAPC has been working on. These are insurance claims after the 2010 flooding. And again, you can see that virtually all of our communities were affected then. And given the impacts of climate change on precipitation patterns and flooding, we can expect to see this become more extreme. So now I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn this over to Indrani to talk about the flood modeling effort on this project.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Thank you. So we're here to talk about what we will do as part of this project. We will be developing a watershed-wide stormwater flood model for all of the Neponset River watershed. And we are going to talk about the benefits of this project, why we're doing this regional flood model, what are you going to get out of it, what are the types of products that you will see coming out of this project, and how will that benefit you in the watershed context, as well as benefit you, your individual community. So we have some introductory slides that speak to the changing trends in precipitation, and looking at what has happened historically and what is expected to happen in the future. In the Northeast, over the last 50 years, precipitation, annual average precipitation has increased by 10%. But as a result of the changing patterns of precipitation, we're seeing decreased precipitation in summer, periods of episodic drought, which is affecting both agriculture as well as trees. It's causing impacts on the water supply, is affecting water quality, as well as overall stresses to the ecosystem. And we're seeing potentially wetter springs as well. Historically, there have been already changes in precipitation that have been observed, and this is looking at just historic data. This is not looking at climate change projections. But if we look at what the 6-hour rainfall event used to be, the 6-hour 10-year rainfall event used to be 3.2 inches in 1961. This is the TP40 standards. That is now more than, it's about 3.4 inches. So there is an increase, but where the increase is really pronounced are in these 24-hour duration type events. And if you look at the 100-year storm, it used to be 6.5, and now we have about 2 more inches of rain. So overall, really more increased changes in precipitation in the form of more intense and more frequent storms occurring. As I mentioned, the changes in annual total precipitation, if you look at the numbers steadily, it has increased by 10% in the last 50 years. But then this is where we go into the future climate change projections. These are some of the projections that are the latest and the greatest available now for the Commonwealth. These are some of the projections that have been developed by Cornell University, and these are also being adopted as part of EEA's projections and best available data that should be used in MVP projects. And so that has a mid-century annual precipitation projection of about 58.7 inches, with an end of the century, more like 2070 planning horizon to be about 59.7. And then, of course, number of days with rain greater than 2 inches, which is a threshold for extreme precipitation, is also likely to increase. As I mentioned, these standards are being folded into what is now has been released by EEA, and it's called the Climate Resilience Design Standards Tool. This is a tool that has been adopted by all state agencies in Massachusetts. That was released by Governor Baker in April of 2021, and an updated version was released on the state's website just about 2 weeks ago. Western Sampson has been the prime technical consultant for this tool. This tool encompasses the latest and greatest sea level rise, extreme precipitation, and extreme heat projections that we will be using as part of this project. We're using sea level rise, storm surge primarily, and precipitation. But we want to mention that this is something that we will be leveraging, and this is the new standard that all MVP projects will be used to, will be recommended to use in as part of planning and design projects. So this just walks through the different aspects of where this tool can be used. It can be used in planning pre-design, schematic design, can be used as the design progresses through permitting and final design, as well as in the construction phase. Primarily, the use of this tool is in this planning pre-design phase, which is really the phase where we are in, where this is the regional flood model will be used for planning purposes. So we want to use the climate change projections coming from this tool to inform the scenarios and the design storms, both rainfall as well as sea level rise, storm surge, that we will be using as part of this project. Again, this is just more information about the tool. And when I stop presenting, I can, or maybe Jenny or Jerice can add a link to the tool in the chat just for reference, or I can do that later as well. But essentially, I wanted to highlight that we will be using this tool for primarily two purposes. One, again, to get the latest and greatest precipitation sea level rise projections that we will be using as part of this project will be derived from best available information that's available in this tool. And two, we will be also using this tool potentially to help understand concept projects and how they rank in terms of site suitability. This project, this tool is used as to consider site suitability and regional coordination. So we will be using this tool as a guidance for that aspect as well. We want to show you some types of products that you can expect to see coming out of this project. We just completed or we are working with the Charles River Watershed Association, your neighboring watershed, in developing a similar flood model. We've completed phases 1 and 2 of that project, and we just wanted to show you some examples of the types of products that you can expect to see that we have produced in the Charles River Watershed, and want to get your feedback on what you think, if these are the right types of products, if that's what you're expecting. But we want to give you some concrete examples for you to react to. So with that, I am going to launch. We actually developed this project. So this project for the Charles River Watershed, it started out in October of 2020. We finished phase 1 where the full model was developed, and then phase 2 was last year. We just wrapped that up in 2022 of June, where we further advanced the model and developed some site-specific concepts for projects, as well as developed a lot of watershed-wide flood mitigation strategies. So the first part of the flood model is I'm going to launch the story map here to show you the results of how we published the flood model results. It's really helpful to see a graphic story map to instead of reading through pages of technical report. And Jenny and Jerice, if either of you don't mind, please putting the link of the story map in the chat, that'll be great. Thank you. So this was for the entire upper and the middle Charles River watershed, 20 communities were included. Just gives you some background information of the project. We factored in the greatest and latest projections. These are the design storm projections for the Charles River watershed. We will be developing similar design storm projections for the Neponset River watershed, looking at the latest Cornell projections of the intensity, duration, frequency curves, as I mentioned, coming through the state's climate resilience design standards tool. We developed the model first. So basically, this is a stormwater flood model that shows the interactions of flooding from both piped infrastructure, drainage infrastructure, as well as from riverine impacts. What is unique about the Neponset River watershed is the impacts of tidal influence, as well as the impacts of sea level rise and storm surge that could occur in the future. So the Charles River flood model was developed it started off with looking at pipes 24 inches in diameter and greater, and then we added finer detail in specific areas where we went all the way up to 18 and 12 inches as well in some specific areas. It had extensive field verification of 442 structures. Once we field verified the structures, we also gave that information back in GIS to the community. So you have field verified data set to supplement your GIS information. The 1D model, which is just the pipes, had to be supplemented with what happens when flooding actually escapes out of manholes or pipes get surcharged. How does the flooding propagate through the ground? And so that was essentially the 2D component to show the extents and depths of flooding above ground. We need to calibrate the model. The model was calibrated to March 2010 storm, which was about a 50 or 48 hour, it was approximately 100-year event over a period of 48 hours. And so the model, we would need to agree upon appropriate calibration data points for the Neponset River watershed, as well as what storm needs makes most sense for calibration. We've seen overall, both the Mystic and the Charles are calibrated to the March 2010 event. So it may be reasonable to use a similar storm for Neponset as well. But we'll definitely revisit these decisions and discussions later in the meeting. This shows a snapshot of the future projected changes in precipitation were mapped at the watershed-wide scale, both in terms of % changes in area of precipitation. This is looking at the 2070 10-year storm event, which is like a 25-year storm of today. And then this also shows the increase in total runoff in terms of volume. So we're seeing the percentage changes both by area as well as volume across the subwatershed. This type of model also helps to see where disproportionately vulnerable population groups in the watershed may be affected, and is helpful to inform priority projects in those locations. Once we had the model developed, it was also helpful to look at the results in terms of how the changes occur between the present day and the future. So we've developed some cool graphics with sliders to show the changes between the present day 10-year is on the left, the 10-year of 2070 is on the right, and you could see the intensification of the blues, which correspond to flood depths above ground. Darker blues correspond to larger depths of flooding. And then this model can also be used to conduct a vulnerability assessment for the critical facilities. So what was really helpful to see was how you could overlay the flood model results on your critical infrastructure facilities that you have in your communities we could do a similar approach for Neponset River Watershed and kind of look at which facilities such as police stations, fire stations, other critical emergency facilities, as well as impacts on public water supplies as a result of this future changes in extreme precipitation. We've also developed a flood viewer for all of these results, which can be, again, you can look at the flood viewer a little bit more with the link that is in the chat, but you could launch the flood viewer right from the story map here. And the flood viewer gives an easy way to access all the results. With that, I will go back to the slide deck here. So that was really all about the model development discussion. And I also wanted to share with you in terms of the flood model will be developed in PC Swim 2D platform. What is really helpful with a 2D flood model is it helps you to see the extent and duration of flooding. So this is just a snip of the flood extents from the 2017 10-year storm at this intersection of William Street and Wellesley. And these types of animation videos could help you understand the duration and extent of flooding for the typical storms that you see, both for shorter duration storms as well as for the longer duration storms, for the 24-hour storms in this case. So I think we're going to launch question number 1 here. So Andres, if you can please launch the poll, that would be great. So the question is, based on what you've just heard so far, what would your primary goal be for the use of this model and its output? And we're recommending you type in your top choice, please. Would it be helpful to understand for flood control planning within your community? Would it be helpful for bylaw, ordinance, regulation changes at the local level? Would it help supporting engineering designs for specific sites or certain types of infrastructure? Support evaluation of already identified local stormwater management projects, participation in regional mitigation projects. We're seeing very active polling here. A lot of moving bars. I know this could be used for all of the ones that we've mentioned here as well as others, but we encourage you to enter your top choice here, please.
And if you're not shy, feel free to chat. If it is other, if your answer is other, feel free to put it in the chat. Thank you.
So that's great. Seems the bars have stopped moving and we have critical mass of responses here from the participants. And the winner is number 3 for supporting engineering designs for specific sites or certain types of infrastructure. That is great. That received the highest votes, but followed very closely for flood control planning within your community. Yes, absolutely. And for review of bylaw, ordinance, regulation changes at the local level. It's great to see that this could also be helped for evaluating already identified local flood projects as well as for regional mitigation efforts. Carrie, I don't know if there was, we have more time for questions and discussion at the end, right? So
We do. Yep.
did you want to move on to the next section or pause here for additional comments or questions? Move on.
It's up to you. I have it at the end of your slides.
Okay. All right. So I think in the interest of time, we'll keep moving. I'll give you the next set of questions, the next set of X out of that. So once the flood model has been developed, what can you do? How can you use the flood model, both in the watershed context as well as for your individual communities? As I mentioned, we did that in in sort of phase 2 of the Charles River flood modeling project. However, now with the knowledge that we have from that project, we feel that we could somewhat fast track the model development, as well as what we could do with the model in the same phase for the Neponset River Watershed. And I want to share with you some of the watershed-wide flood modeling strategies that we evaluated using the Charles River flood model. And again, that was it's a separate story map. Jenny, if you can please chat that in, that would be great. Thank you. So once we've developed the flood model, we actually, and that was done for this over 175,000 acres approximately of the upper and the Charles River, we basically prioritized 3 categories of stormwater flood mitigation projects or solutions that we were evaluating through the model. And those were binned by looking at green stormwater infrastructure, land conservation, what happens when lack thereof of land conservation occurs, and then how would reduction of impervious area benefit the watershed. So really the types of nature-based solutions that we looked at for the Charles River, using the Charles River flood model, were categorized into land conservation, wetland protection, or restoration or protection, increasing tree canopy. Interesting infographics to speak about what green stormwater infrastructure means, how that helps in reducing rainfall and runoff. One of the strategies that we looked at, so there were about 6 strategies at the watershed-wide scale that we evaluated. The first one that we looked at is what happens if across the watershed we store runoff from the future by the 2072 year event, which is about 4.5 inches of rain from 50% of impervious cover in the watershed. So we're storing about 4.5 inches of rain from 50% of the watershed impervious cover. How would that mitigate flooding? And essentially we saw a decrease in terms of the area flooded. There was a decrease of about 16% for the 2-year storm and about 5% for the 10-year storm. In terms of total runoff volume, the decrease was about 26% for the 2-year storm and about 12% for the 10-year storm. So you sort of start to see a little bit of the rate of diminishing returns as the storm intensification occurs. But it did provide some significant benefits in some local areas as well with this targeted reduction. It's interesting to have a watershed-wide flood model because you could start to see the responses at a sub-watershed level with the same strategy. So what we've done here is for the entire upper and the Charles River watershed, we split that up into major sub-basins. And then the results here are showing how the benefit of that storing 4.5 inches of rain, what would that have in terms of percent change for the 2070 10-year storm. So this percent change is with respect to no action. So if you don't do anything versus if you store 4.5 inches of rain, how would that change? And the colors correspond to the different percentage changes with sort of the more than 10% being the darker blues and less than 1% being the lighter blues. So, and this strategy proved to be one of the more beneficial strategies. Again, we have these slider bars to show their changes. Another interesting one was to look at what happens when you evaluate the flood mitigation benefits using green stormwater infrastructure. And that we focused on large parcels within the watershed. And we saw some modest decreases in flood reduction, both in terms of area and volume. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but again, like you have this as reference to see how the different types of strategies that were evaluated, like I mentioned, upland storage in the watershed, what that would do to look at optimized flood mitigation, flood storage and optimized reservoir operations was also evaluated in the Charles River watershed as well as in the Mystic. And we saw some opportunistic improvements in some locations where we were able to lower down the reservoirs and increase more flood storage before a storm But again, the increases were, the decrease in flooding was modest. So I would, I'm going to scroll through a little bit quickly to get to the summary of the results. After having gone through all of this information, what was sort of really eye-opening for us to see was this plot here that showed that really none of the strategies that we have evaluated to date, and again, these strategies were somewhat evaluated independent of each other, was really not able to mitigate the future flooding that we're expected to see as an intensification of storms from future climate change. So this plot here shows this is the volume of flooding that we're expected to see from the watershed under a baseline 10-year storm. That's a 10-year storm of today. And that flooding is likely to increase by as much from the in the future, 2070. And then these set of blue bars here are the flood volumes with the different strategies that we ran through for the model: reduction of impervious cover, storing more stormwater in green infrastructure, land conservation or lack thereof. So this one was a lack of land conservation, and that showed a remarkable increase of flooding if we're not able to conserve, if we're not able to protect our conservation land. But what is really interesting to see that none of these strategies were able to mitigate this differential of increase that we're seeing between present day and the future. So what basically underpins the importance of we need to do a lot more, like we're to move the dial in terms of mitigating flooding, or to make flooding no worse than it is today. We need to do a lot more. And we need to do probably combinations of these. And then the other thing that I mentioned is we also did some site-specific design concepts for the Charles River flood model by looking at concepts, site-specific strategies in Waltham, Medway, and Newton, and we'll probably get to some of that. We will get to some of that in this phase as well of the project. This was a site for Hardy Pond in Waltham that we evaluated, looking at increasing flood storage by providing, by lowering the pond, as well as by providing additional green stormwater infrastructure surface storage. We looked at at Oakland Park in Medway, and we looked at stormwater flood storage opportunities in Newton as well. And we developed concepts for each of these 3 sites. With that, I will go back to my PowerPoint presentation here. And so hopefully that helped you understand a little bit of the types of things that can be done with using the flood model, a regional flood model. And then with that, Andres, if you can please launch question number 2, where we're asking you, what nature-based solutions are you currently pursuing within your community? This is multiple choice. Land conservation, reducing impervious surfaces, green stormwater infrastructure, wetland restoration, floodplain reconnection, reservoir management, dam removal. You can choose as many of these as you would like, please. Great, the responses are coming in. Seeing a lot of responses for stormwater infrastructure, reduction of impervious area, land conservation, some for wetland restoration, floodplain reconnection. Would love to hear a little bit more there. Not seeing any responses on reservoir management yet. And dam removal, yes.
Maybe we can record the answers from this, and we need to move on from time perspective. We're just getting a little behind here.
Yep. Well, that we're launching question number 3.
Oh, and Johnny, they came up both at the same time. So
okay, all right.
Folks are answering both. Yeah.
Excellent. And I think that was it. So I could stop sharing. So, or if there's any particular slide that you'd want me to go back to, is this a natural pause for questions, Carrie? I'm looking at you, or Jenny, for timekeeping.
Yes, if people want to ask some questions.
There's a question in the chat from Lawrence and Stoughton. And Johnny, what is an example of the GIS data you will provide to the town? So I believe you had mentioned that go ahead, I'll let you talk.
Right. So in terms of the GIS data we will provide back to the town would show the GIS files that would show the extents and depths of flooding. We also get flood elevation information out of the model. So you would be able to get any and all of the information that comes from the model back into a GIS format back to you. We're also going to incorporate the results into a web viewer. So you would not necessarily always need to access GIS files to look at the results. You could go into a web viewer much similar to the Charles River Flood Model viewer that we've developed, and zoom into your area of interest and be able to get the information there. Any other questions in the chat, Jenny?
Nope.
Jason has his hand raised.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Quick question. Is there something that we might be able to do as part of this to marry the Charles River flood model to what we're doing in the Neponset for those communities that were fortunate enough to be involved in both of them, so we can have one source for all?
That is a great question, Jason. That would be a truly inter-watershed regional flood model that crosses watershed boundaries. I would answer, I would think, Jason, that it is definitely this project will set us up to do that. To what extent we will be able to actually integrate both the two watershed models in this phase, I don't know if we will be able to do that in this phase, but having developed the flood model for Neponset at the watershed-wide scale certainly sets us up for that next step to be able to integrate models between watersheds.
No, that's great. That's exactly an answer that I was expecting. It's setting us up for future implementation, which is fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's just one more question in the chat from Tom. Have you considered including a broader representation of critical infrastructure to be included in the model? For example, I did not see any electric power infrastructure.
Yes, that's a great question, Tom. We can include any critical infrastructure information that we can have access from you all, from the communities. So yes, we didn't necessarily have that as a specific category. I think we had it under utilities maybe. But if GIS spatial information or even non-spatial information, we can tell us where that infrastructure is, that can be incorporated into the model. And yes, I agree, including power infrastructure and as critical infrastructure is absolutely important.
All right, well, let's move on back to Carrie because we are down to 20 minutes and there'll be a chance for more questions, as well as we're going to have more meetings on this project, as Carrie is going to talk about later. There'll be plenty of time for more questions and ideas.
Definitely. I will try to catch up. So the next component of the project that we'll talk about is the climate adaptation framework. So obviously flooding's one of the most significant impacts we need to plan for, but we also need to plan for high heat, more extreme storms, and communities are really facing a lot, and none of these impacts respect municipal boundaries, and the adaptation is costly. Communities can't be expected to do this alone or in silos. So what we hope to do is develop a framework on which we can build a climate collaborative. So first, the framework team, which will consist of NepRWA and MAPC, we're going to gather all of your plans that touch on climate adaptation, and we'll be asking for that after you submit your flood modeling data. We're also going to ask you to identify some municipal stakeholders who can participate in virtual meetings, 2 to 3. to sort of fine tune this framework and really help us to prioritize some of these shared issues, so that in the future, perhaps we can come up with some regional solutions that can be implemented to help all of our communities throughout the watershed. So again, we're going to take all of those plans. We are going to synthesize that information. We're going to look at each community's priorities and figure out where there's overlap, figure out where there's gaps. And again, we'll want your participation in a couple of meetings. They will be virtual. They will be during the day, so that we can really hone in on what is most important for all of our communities. So we also have a robust community outreach plan for this project, as with all MVP projects. So first, we're going to have a project website, and this website is going to be a place where we can provide information about the project, provide updates about the project, and solicit information, particularly from the public, about where they see flooding, as well as some other information. So we will let you know when that's up and running. We're also going to conduct some stakeholder mapping. We really want to meaningfully engage environmental justice and climate vulnerable populations. So we're looking for community organizations that can partner with us and help us reach those communities. We're also looking for community organizations and departments that can help us distribute information for public education purposes. So we'll be doing that all in tandem with the flood modeling project. We're also going to hold a couple of public meetings. So we're going to hold an environmental justice focus group, and we will have a couple of virtual regional meetings where we are going to talk about this project, solicit some information from the public about their climate concerns, about where they see flooding, anything else we think they can be helpful in providing us information about this project. And we also are going to want their buy-in when we're done. When we come up with some strategies that we want to implement, we're going to need their support, the public support for these, for funding, etc. We also will develop specialized materials for the classroom. So we'll be visiting the 5th grade classrooms in all of our partner towns. We'll send them home with a backpack flyer to try to educate their parents and drive them to the website or drive them to the meetings. We'll also be developing a slew of materials, both printed and electronic form, to be posted around town, on town websites, distributed through community groups, and through social media. So we're really trying to use every avenue at our disposal to get to as many people as possible. We're also going to hold a workshop for, again, this will likely be virtual, but a workshop for municipal staff to talk about some resources that can be used by communities to help update their land use regulations for climate resilience. MAPC has come up with a great toolkit of resources to help towns update their regulations. And after that workshop, we'll be available to provide technical assistance for any community that actually wants to make use of those resources or implement any strategies if they're at that point. So I ran through that because I'm trying to catch up. Does anybody have any questions about that? Those components of this project? More information will be coming.
I just want to note that Van put a link in the chat to MAPC's Climate Resilient Land Use Strategies resources. It's a mouthful. We got to come up with a nickname for that. But I don't see any questions in the chat yet, Carrie.
Excellent. All right.
We have the timeline question. Yeah, we're getting there.
What is, oh, yes. So a schedule is forthcoming in a later slide. But all of these things are going to be happening at the same time. These are parallel processes. We're going to be starting immediately on all of the above. So we'll have time for questions even later as well. So let me move on to logistics and next steps. So logistics, the first one, cash match. Most of you have agreed to provide a cash match to help support this project. So NepRWA will be sending invoices to those communities, and we would like remittance of payment by the end of the calendar year so that we can make sure that we're covering everything that we need to cover. You've also all agreed to an in-kind match. And so for this, the project team is going to be providing a shared Excel spreadsheet where you can input the names of staff, their positions, what they were working on, and what their hourly rate is. It's really, really important that you do not underestimate the time that staff is working on this. And you do not have to track your time in increments of less than 1 hour. Then the last thing is, please make sure when you come up with your hourly rate on which you're going to base this in-kind match, make sure you're not just including the salary information. We want to make sure that you're including the full cost of that staffer's time. And it may be that there are very different staffers who are working on the flood modeling, who are working on the framework, and who are working on some of the outreach if necessary. So please make sure we include everybody, and we're going to want you to track that monthly so that I can do the reporting to both Dedham and to the MVP program. So we will get that out to you at some point after this meeting, and we can answer any questions about that, but we're trying to make it as simple as possible.
Carrie, there's a question from Marina in the chat. What's the difference between the cash match and the non-cash match? Is it too late to opt into the cash match?
That is an excellent question. Oops, I did not mean to do that.
I think we should, Marina, follow up with you directly,
yes,
if that's all right, because that's a specific question to Milton.
Sorry about that.
But the difference is in-kind is the time that all of you spend supporting our request, attending meetings, doing pre-work, providing input, and those hours, all that time, those hours are of value to the MVP program and count towards the 25% requirement project total. The cash match pays directly for specifically actual work that we're doing. So it's paying for the public outreach and education to Neponset, and it's paying Weston and Sampson for modeling work. So the cash produces the work, the match gives us the support we need.
Yes, so we could follow up, Marina.
And I just want to note, so we're going to be sending you, as we've mentioned throughout this presentation, a request for some data. We need some data for the modeling as soon as possible. And we're going to be using a SharePoint site for that request. So you'll be able to just drag and drop information. We're generally looking for, as you would imagine from Indrani's presentation, things that support stormwater modeling, right? So GIS around stormwater and culverts, as well as modeling reports from previous work and studies, information on dams that may be in your community, et cetera. So we will be getting that out very shortly here and give you a final deadline for that and be reminding you. And then, as Carrie mentioned, there'll be a second request coming a little following that that will be supporting the framework and the, I'm not going to use the right acronym, I apologize, but so that's forthcoming.
And finally, the timeline. So as with all MVP programs, this project needs to be completed by June 30th, 2023. So this is a very simplified version of the schedule of meetings, but there is essentially one meeting every month, and it might not be the same staff that is attending every single month. So you're all here for the project kickoff, which is fantastic. So there's some in-kind match right there. We're going to have 3 flood meetings once the data has been submitted, to sort of talk about what you want to see in the modeling. We are going to have the workshop on land use, climate adaptation resources, and then 2 to 3 meetings to help us sort of solidify this framework for a climate collaborative across the Neponset. While the staff will certainly be doing some of the legwork to begin with, we are going to want your input on helping us to prioritize some of the actions that you're interested in. And then we are going to hold 3 meetings for the public, which is optional for municipal employees to attend, but just wanted to let you know when those would be happening.
I just want to reiterate, not everybody on this call would be expected to come to every meeting, depending on your interest, availability, and sort of how you want to divide and conquer.
Yes, it could be that you've got, planning board members coming to the framing meetings versus staff coming to some of the other meetings. So, so we'll be in touch with you about that. Okay, last chance to answer questions today. We have 5 minutes left. We managed to catch up.
Hi, it's Sarah Raposa from Medfield. I just joined
Yeah.
at the end. Will you send the presentation out so I can watch it from the start?
We will, yes, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I'll have more questions.
Absolutely.
This is a quiet group.
Any other initial questions? Again, we will, we'll send out the slides. We've recorded the presentation, and we are always available to answer questions afterwards, and we will be directly in touch after this meeting with those data requests, and you can always ask questions at that point too.
Hi, good morning. Tom Birmingham here. Just one more question about the model. If I missed it, I apologize. I believe the model for the Charles River was the upper portion of the Charles River. And a lot of the benefit of flood control in the upper region of the Charles would go towards the lower region of the Charles in the event of a large flood by reducing financial impact on the lower region of the Charles. And my question is, how does the model sort of quantify or identify the value of the work that's done in the upper Charles to benefit the lower Charles?
That's a great question, Tom. Thank you for asking that. The model for the upper Charles sort of ends at the Watertown Dam. Everything downstream of the Watertown Dam is the lower Charles. We haven't necessarily built out, and there are several models that are available for the lower Charles watershed as well. A lot of the communities present here have their models integrated as part of the lower Charles River flood model. Through the work that we've done with the Charles River watershed, we have talked about as next steps to actually build this out to incorporate everything downstream of the Watertown Dam as well as factor in the effects of sea level rise and storm surge. So, the framework definitely exists again to do that. It's just it hasn't been done yet in terms of looking at opportunistic flood storage in the upper watershed to get to the lower Charles. But I would say that the framework exists for us to be able to do that once the integration of the upper and the middle Charles River watershed with the lower Charles has been done.
And if I may, a quick follow-up, has it been anticipated in doing the model for the Neponset watershed that there will be a segregation between upper, middle, and lower watershed?
The current scope of work that we have as part of this contract includes developing the model for all of the watershed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just put a note in, if you did not introduce yourself in the chat, would you do so before you leave? We just want to save that for attendance purposes.
Not seeing any more questions in the chat right now, Carrie. Anyone have anything else?
Well, if that's the case, perhaps we can adjourn. Again, we will be in touch soon and probably frequently. And so there will be plenty of other opportunities to ask questions, and we'll be providing updates. So just thank you again for coming, and thank you so much for participating in this project. You know, I think the end result is going to be really exciting. So